Good afternoon. My name is Tom. I will be temporarily taking over operations from the fool who normally runs this channel for the purpose of this video. Allow me to introduce myself. For the most part, I work at the exchange here in Chicago, but I also run my own private whiskey investment fund. Please contact me if you'd like to get involved. We are small but growing. We've had some successes in the past. We recently bought the entire allocation of a midwinter nights bourbon from High West. That was us. Everything in Illinois went to us. And we're still growing. I will warn you that we are very exclusive. The application process for getting involved is for sending me money so that I can buy you whiskey for investment purposes is very difficult, very arduous. But if you'd like to be involved, please get in touch. So I was happy to discover that the normal nonsense that goes on with this channel with rum and brandy and so on would not be occurring with this episode. When I showed up to host, it was all these bourbons to taste, which is excellent. Normally, this channel would encourage you to try other things. That's completely silly. Whiskey is the best, most perfect, most pure spirit ever created by God, and is in fact so perfect and so pure that it should never be sullied by human mouths. Should in fact go straight into a climate-controlled warehouse where it can accumulate value until the end of days. So I will taste through all of these. I will confess it is a bit strange to me to be tasting through whiskeys for the purpose of evaluating them for drinking, in that I normally do not drink my whiskey. Whiskey, why would I? Whiskey is an investment vehicle. To drink whiskey is to literally piss out your money. Why would I ever do that? I will occasionally have a vodka tonic or a nice California Chardonnay if I'm in a business meeting, but I take no joy in it. In fact, I take no joy in anything in my life, save for the abstract satisfaction of watching numbers go up. So, but in any case, with my hosting expertise, you are getting not only an excellent palate, but high-level sophistication in investment experience. So let us begin. I believe the impetus for this tasting session was the pair of single barrel Jepsons bourbons. The Jepsons bourbon brand is rather recent, and it stems from CH Distillery, purchasing the Jepsons Malört brand a number of years ago. Jepsons Malört being a rather disgusting and at the same time rather addictive liqueur based in Chicago. CH Distillery also had a line of bourbons called CH Bourbon, which was mainly sourced MGP products. Along the way, they also accumulated some Tennessee products from George Dickel. But in any case, no one really bought CH Bourbon, so they have now repackaged it with this more well-known brand, Jepsons, to create Jepsons Bourbon. They have also now, still more recently, created a single barrel series. What is interesting about the single barrel series is that you may choose whether you get your barrel from Tennessee, that is to say George Dickel, or Indiana, that is to say MGP. So we have, this tasting appears to combine the two MGP, the two Tennessee-based Dickel bottlings versus a pair of MGP bottlings from Indiana. So we will now pour these products and sample them and evaluate them for drinking purposes, as silly as that is. So, the tops are not behaving. So let us proceed in logical order, beginning with Tennessee and going to Indiana. So this is Jepson's Single Barrel Straight Bourbon Whiskey. This is barrel number Z10. It is from Tennessee, which almost guarantees that it is a George Dickel bottling. It is bottled at 53.5% ABV. Some of these are apparently released at cask strength. This one is not. It has been released at a mere 107 proof. I will now give you tasting notes on this bourbon or quasi-bourbon, since it is technically a Tennessee whiskey. After the initial round of tasting notes, I will add water, as is the custom of this channel, and we will return to them in order. So, if you know anything about George Dickel's line of bourbons or quasi-bourbons, you will be aware of the slight Flintstones vitamin note that tends to accompany them. This tends to be hated by many people. On the nose, I am getting a moderate dose of that Flintstones vitamin note. It really comes across more as a certain minerality, a rockiness accompanied by Fruit Loops, the cereal, the children's cereal. I am also getting strong notes of toasted coconut, stewed tea, particularly Lipton's tea. There is a cherry note, but it is not the cherry juice. It is more the skins of cherry. And then hardwood smoke from cherry wood. Hints of black mole sauce from Mexican cuisine. And a little bit of tree bark. On the palate, from perspective of a bourbon drinker, quite nice. Light on the Dickel signature note. There is a slight, or rather more than slight, distilled Fruit Loops note on this, which I would be remiss not to mention. There is a Kirsch note on this, or rather a maraschino liqueur note. And then more traditional bourbon characteristics. Dried leaves, coconut macaroons in particular, so coconut cookies. Overstewed Liptons again, white pepper, a little bit of a cola cube note, a bit of macadamia nut, and an apple note, which is reminiscent of Laird's apple brandy. Let us move on to the second bottling. In fact, I should add water before I proceed as such. Only a single squirt. So this is a single barrel, hand-selected barrel, they are saying, from George Dickel in Tennessee, picked by Binny's here in Chicago in 2013. This is apparently an archived option from the regular host of this channel. This is aged 9 years, handcrafted, distilled in Cascade Hollow in Tullahoma. The barrel number is written on the side in what looks like pen. It is D20-4-21. I will now evaluate this spirit. Much more intense on the Flintstones vitamin note, which will drive away some people. Others who are pleased by this note are encouraged to continue on with the video. There is a note of stout beer with cherry characteristics added. So cherry stout, if you've ever had that. There is also a minerality, so a wet rock note. Lipton's cut with other tea notes, particularly an Old Puer tea note. So aged to wear. But rust as well, like a rusty junkyard car, is very prominent. Tobanjan, the Szechuan hot bean paste, and a little bit of Kenyan coffee on the palate. Again, follows very much from the nose. The proofage on this, which I did not mention, is 57.5%. Not so probably brought down from barrel proof by a little bit. Very much follows from the nose. On the Flintstones vitamins, a little bit of banana peel, cherry stout again, old rocks, mossy old rocks. Not quite the peppery heat I would expect from Tobanjan, but certainly a fermented bean note. Oolong tea, coffee, but more Costa Rican coffee this time, island coffee. A bit thin, surprisingly short in the mouth for a 9-year-old whiskey. And then there is also a slightly fermented note to go along, almost like if you were to oak age sauerkraut. But I'm enjoying this characteristic to the extent that I can enjoy anything. Moving on to the third whiskey in the lineup. This is the Jepsons Bourbon Single Barrel, 53.5% alcohol. This is barrel number Y86 from Indiana. So this is almost certainly an MGP bourbon. On the nose. Bourbon. It smells like a very basic bourbon. Nutshells, old tea bags, dust, wood shavings, old wood shavings. But it also smells quite hot on the nose, quite nippy. The alcohol is showing considerably more than the previous glasses. Even though the proof is not any higher. A little kirsch, something slightly green and vegetal, almost like artichoke leaves. On the palate. Bourbon, again, very basic bourbon. Quite thin on the palate, very forward. This comes across as quite young and quite alcohol forward. So we're getting some very basic notes: demerara sugar, vanilla bean, sweet tea, a bit of cherry liqueur again, but not maraschino. This is more like the sort of thing that your grandmother would drink. These sort of sweetened cherry liqueur. That is the entirety of the notes that I get on this bourbon. It is quite basic. Let us move on to the fourth option. Actually, I've been remiss in adding water to these, so I will do that now. This is George Remus, cast strength straight bourbon whiskey, also from MGP. This is the Off-Premise 2020 selection. Off-Premise is a retail shop in Chicago. Single barrel, and it is bottled at 60.85% ABV. I will now give you tasting notes for this bourbon. An intriguing mixture of dessert-like characteristics and at the same time somewhat vegetal, somewhat green characteristics. I am getting hardwood smoked baklava, woody baklava, dried cherry, but also at the same time juniper leaves, anise, and then sweet tea again. a Snickers bar, a little bit of coffee, Vienna roasted coffee, Turkish Delight, a little bit of an orange peel note. I find this, if I were a drinker of bourbon on a regular basis, I would find this nose extremely appealing. On the palate, very interesting, very well balanced between, again, the dessert-like characteristics and at the same time a certain herbaceousness. So, sweet and savory. So if you could imagine a baklava that was covered in fennel and juniper, you would be getting close. You would also add on some kirsch to that, a little bit of coffee, perhaps more coffee dregs, coffee that has been sitting in a cup for some time. A bit of overstewed tea, again, very tannic tea. There is a distinctive gummy bears note on this, which I'm enjoying very much. And then cinnamon spices, a bit of clove, and then some ginger powder as well. This is an extremely delicious bourbon, and if you are the sort of person who drinks such things, you might well enjoy this. I will give it some water, and we will return to it in a moment. This is barrel strength, so I'm adding slightly more water than I normally would. I assess the amount of water added to this to be adequate. Let us return and complete our evaluation of these different bourbons. And at the end of that, I will give you some investment advice concerning all of them, because that is my particular area of expertise. Let us begin with the Tennessee Jepsons Bourbon Single Barrel, once more time. With water, it becomes more floral. Flowers made out of maraschino liqueur, if that makes any sense. Cherry flowers. And then there's a certain pink peppercorn note and a certain nutshell note, mixed nutshells that have been toasted with fire. Very nice, very appealing on the nose. Extremely nice on the palate as well. Comes across as a bourbon, but a bourbon wrapped in cherry and wet stones. That distinctive George Dickel note is still in force here, although not nearly as much as on the 9-year-old, which is next in line to this Jepson's. Cherry, wet stones, bourbon, more nutshell. And it is very lovely and floral and peppery on the back end. This fills my mouth very nicely. I suspect this is no more than about 4 or 5 years old, so I am quite impressed with it showing at a rather young age. As I am required to give a numerical rating on these, I would give this an 82 plus out of 100 points. Let us move on to the Dickel 9-year-old hand-selected barrel for Binny's with water now. Becomes more of a chalk dust kind of bourbon. Very dusty. Otherwise, more of what was already there, and also more medicinal than it was already there. It smells a bit like Sour Patch candy, which I am not offended by. More Tobon John, hardwood smoke, and traditional oaky notes as well. It is not an unpleasant nose unless you hate Dickel. Basically, the notes remain the same from my initial rendering of them. It is a bit more dusty, a bit more on sweetness. There is a little bit of a Kool-Aid powder component on this. I don't know if you've ever tried tasting Kool-Aid powder straight from the packet. It's actually a little bit sour, as well as being sweet and fruity. That is a very prominent component on this, now that I've added water. This is an extremely interesting and distinctive quasi-bourbon / Tennessee whiskey. The people who dislike George Dickel should not buy this, because it is very exemplary of that style. But those of you who are more positive on that style, who wish to drink it, should buy this. I would give this 84 points out of 100. Let us move on to the third whiskey in our lineup, which is the Jepsons Single Barrel from MGP, now with water. On the nose, it still smells like bourbon. It becomes a bit more peppery and a bit more boozy. The alcohol, which was already prominent on the nose, actually comes out a little bit more. Otherwise, it smells pretty much the same. If you could cherry smoke a tea, smoke tea leaves with cherry wood, this is a bit what it might smell like. There is more pepper as well on the palate. This is not terrible, but it is quite thin, flat. The ethanol is a bit prominent. It comes across to me as extremely basic as a bourbon. Cherry, sweet tea, nutshells, ethanol. That is about all. Those are all the tasting notes that I can perceive at this time. I would give this a 70 points out of 100. I do not think this is an excellent choice for those of you who drink bourbon. Let us move on to our fourth option, the George Remus off-premise pick from 2020. Now with a bit of water. With water, this becomes even more candied. But at the same time, those herbaceous, slightly green notes remain. This smells like a slice of cherry pie with a side of grilled asparagus, plus some cinnamon chewing gum. I don't know if any of you remember Big Red chewing gum, which was a prominent feature of my youth, but I perceive Big Red on the nose. On the palate, this bourbon strikes an excellent balance between desserty and herbaceous. So pastries, but also gin and cinnamon and black pepper. There is a little bit of coffee, fennel. I would also add rhubarb pie as a tasting note. And there's an additional floral component which is more difficult to identify. This is quite good as something to drink. I would rate this an 84 plus out of 100. So to repeat the lineup, I would give this an 82 plus. It is a very reasonable value. This is the Jepsons Tennessee, 80 to 82 plus. The George Dickel 9-year-old from 2013, this is an 84. The MGP Dickel Single Barrel, this is a 70 point bourbon. And the MGP Remus, picked by Off-Premise, I believe this to be an 84 plus bourbon. That concludes my obligations for this review as far as evaluation of these as drinking options. But of course, as an investor, I would be remiss not to discuss the investment side of things. So I invite all of you, if you drink whiskey, to turn this off right now. But if you are a proper consumer of whiskey, that is to say you are putting it in a warehouse somewhere, then keep watching, because I will give you a few additional tidbits. So what do I look for as an investor when I consider buying whiskey? Well, two simple things for the most part. I look for exclusive and I look for expensive. Exclusive can be a number of factors. Brand has a lot to do with it. Age, of course, figures in. But at the same time, if something is a vintage bottling, it can be more exclusive, of course. If something is a single barrel, if it has been sourced, the small non-distillery producers are often more exclusive than the distilleries themselves. And if it has been finished, that immediately makes it more scarce, more unique, more valuable on the secondary market. So I am interested in bottles of that sort. Expensive may seem a bit secondary, and it is compared to exclusivity. That is something you need to focus on first. But I want to buy expensive bottles because I want to save money on storage overhead. It is extremely expensive to store bottles for decades on end professionally. That is not money that I wish my clients to be spending. I would prefer that money to be going to me. So, just to give you some sense, it is if I am buying a ridiculously expensive limited edition bottling from some distillery, even if it is, otherwise objectively the same thing, I am never going to lose money on that expensive bottle because there will never be more of it, right? If I've already gotten my exclusivity side of things handled, I'm not going to lose money on it. But if I have bought a whole lot of something more value-driven that is not as expensive, I am having to pay more for every single bottle I own, right? And that overhead is costing me money in the long term. So it is better for me to concentrate all of my money in a handful of very limited, very expensive bottles than to try to spread it out in a number of value purchases, no matter what upside I may see in those value purchases. And that is an immediate problem. That expensive side of the equation is an immediate problem with all of these. All of these are value driven. So I would prefer it if all of them were 2 to 4 times the prices that they are currently being sold for. But if storage is not a problem for you, they may still be reasonable investment options. Let us go down the line and consider these as potential investments. The Jepsons Tennessee this is very interesting to me because, to be sure, it is much cheaper than I would prefer. I would prefer to be spending much more money. But it is an independent bottling, a source bottling from a boutique, kind of slightly funny and comedic brand. And it is a single barrel. So this makes it an interesting value proposition. Now, would it be better if it were finished in a wine cask? Of course. Would it be better if they charge more money for it? Obviously. But I still think this would be a decent investment vehicle for those who are interested in investing in whiskey in the sort of the penny stocks region of whiskey. I recommend you buy no more than 2 cases of this. But, a case of this would not be, outrageous. If you can deal with the storage problem and the overhead involved with that. This second bottle is more difficult. This first one has a problem in that it is Dickel distillate, and at the moment, this Dickel distillate is not valuable on the market. The fact that I may go out and purchase a 15-year-old George Dickel for around $70, the fact that that product has come out and that is still on the shelves and has not been scooped up by collectors yet indicates that it's essentially worthless. I recommend that you do not buy that for investment purposes. And much the same would go for this 9-year-old from 2013. This has, first of all, this is under Dickel's own name. It is not under a sourced, slightly boutique, funny brand like the Jepsons. This is Dickel's own. It does have a high age statement though, which makes it slightly interesting. So this can be, this is potentially a play for the speculative investor. What I mean is this. At the moment, I believe this to be worthless, but it is entirely possible that the George Dickel distillery will be bulldozed to put up condos or other housing options, or even better, it may go up in a fiery explosion of whiskey along with all of its stocks. Investors like myself secretly dream of the day when all of the great distilleries of the world go up in a gigantic fireball, because that would vastly increase the value of all of the stocks that we have in our warehouses. But this is a more modest bet. You aren't betting on all of the distilleries in the world going up in smoke. You were just betting on George Dickel going up in smoke. It's not like Diageo, the owner, has not shuttered and bulldozed distilleries before, so it seems a live option. And if that is an option, something you see happening, I believe this little 9-year-old would be a reasonable investment. I would buy, again, no more than 2 cases, much the same as this. No more than 2 cases of this. No more than 2 cases of the Dickel 9-year-old. And again, it is a speculative investment. You are betting on the distillery being destroyed at some point in the near future. Let's move on. So MGP is a obviously fascinating investment option, but it is full of potential mines and problems for the unwary. So, for example, this Jepson's bottling of MGP, one may look at this and say this is extremely poor bourbon, or at least extremely mediocre bourbon. So why buy it? It's not going to be, no one's going to be looking to drink this. That would be extremely foolish, because what I look at this and see is an investment gold mine, right? Because what you have here is MGP stock bottled by a slight novelty boutique brand. It's a single barrel, right? So we're getting more and more exclusive. It would be better if they'd finished it in, a Chateau de Chem cask or something like that. But, even as is, I would consider this a very strong investment option. Do not drink it. It is not very good. But buy, I would say, 6 to 8 cases of this minimum. You could go as far as 10, depending on the storage difficulties. This is a bit inexpensive. I would prefer to be spending more money, honestly. But from an investment perspective, I think this is very solid. And the people watching this should buy this, buy a great deal of this. All right. To continue on with the MGP theme. Now, you might think that this would be just as valuable, right, as this Jepson's option. You might say, well, it's this George Remus from off-premise. It's a store pick. It's a single barrel, cask strength. Not bad. Would be better if it were wine finished, all that stuff. But, seems like a safe investment. No. MGP's own brands are utterly without worth. No one should be buying George Dickel. Now, I mean, you if you want to drink the stuff, I mean, it's terrific. This is it's perhaps a bit younger than Smoke Wagon, but frankly, I prefer the fact that the oak candy aspect has not been creeping up on it quite as much. But as an investment vehicle, this is a very poor choice indeed. In fact, it offends me to the heart of my soul that MGP thought they could release their own bourbon under one of their own brands. If they really wanted to sell MGP distillate, what they could have done was source bourbon back from people who had previously sourced from them. Double sourced MGP would have been an extraordinary seller on our market. But because this is just something they've made themselves without, sourcing it from anywhere, it is frankly worthless. It will hit. I expect that this and other Remus store picks will hit the closeout shelves in short order, and I suppose the people who drink this stuff will profit from that and benefit very much if they enjoy the style. But for the rest of us, why wouldn't you spend more money to buy the same thing from a non-distillery producer? And especially if they've finished it in something terrific like a Cote Rôtie cask, for example, or even a California Chardonnay cask. That is the sort of thing I would love to spend my money on. This is crap. This is nothing. Stay away from this. So that is my investment advice. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been informative. And I hope you do not watch any more further videos on this channel because they will be hosted by that idiot who wants to drink rums and mar and other silly things of that sort. Good luck. I hope that your investment future goes swimmingly. And I will speak to you later, I suppose.